Well, Charles Blanning is still here with me, and we're going to talk about his latest book now. It's called Please Mister. It's a substantial book, as you can see. There we go. And I have to say, I enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. I mean, the history of greyhound racing going back as far as you've gone back, I didn't think I'd be so interested in, but how the sport has changed and progressed, it's fascinating. And all I kept thinking was, how did you find out all this stuff, and where did you get the photos from and the information from?
Well, I had a good start because I got in contact with a chap called Timothy Sean O'Brien, who is the great-grandson of Owen Patrick Smith, who invented the electric hare and therefore actually started greyhound racing in the United States in the early 20th century. And not only did Tim provide me with all sorts of archive material, photographs, old press cuttings, but also some lovely stories from his family about his great-grandfather. And it was Tim who gave me what some people may find the rather puzzling title, Please Mister. Because the story of this is that Owen Patrick Smith have been engaged to run the major coursing meeting in America in a place called Hot Springs, South Dakota, and this was back in 1906. And OP, as he's always known to his friends, OP had set up this big coursing meeting in South Dakota. It was for the Waterloo Cup and what they call the Futurity, which was their big stake for the puppies. And he was busily watching the coursing just on the edge of the town, and he felt a little tug at his coat. And he looked down, and there was a little girl, and she said, "Please, mister." And he, like most of us, tried to ignore her, and then tug, 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 tug again. "Please, mister, do they have to kill the rabbit?" Well, that set O.P. Smith thinking. He thought, well, do we have to kill the rabbit? And after many years of experiment and in investing, every last bottom dollar in his pocket in his venture, he at last produced something which meant that they didn't have to kill the rabbit. And thus he created greyhound racing.
And even the journey of that hare is amazing. There was a lady called Irene Castle involved, who was a famous dancer. She was a big influence on it as well. And the first hare, they designed to look like a hare that bobbed up and down, didn't it?
Yes, it was OP at one time had worked on trolley cars, as they would call them, at the World's Fair in Chicago, and he was a man who never forgot a good idea. And the original electric hare system was in fact no more than a kind of miniature trolley car which ran round the outside of the track with an artificial lure attached to it. And it was you can see it quite clearly even in the early tracks in this country, in England, because the system they used at the White City and Wembley and Wimbledon when those tracks opened was the O.P. Smith system. It was his patent. But back at his original track in California, a place called Emeryville, there were an awful lot of greyhounds in California at the time because there was a lot of coursing there. And all the old Californian coursing boys, they just couldn't believe that this was going to happen. And they would come to the track with their dogs and they would say, "Well, O.P., that ain't gonna work. No dog's gonna ever chase that." So we got so fed up with it, eventually he took his hanky out of his pocket and they took the dummy hare off the arm, and he put his handkerchief on the end of the lure and said, "Okay, boys, let a dog go." And of course, as you know, and I know, and everyone knows, a good greyhound will chase anything. So off goes O.P. Smith's hanky around the track, and with all the dogs, of course, chasing it like billy-o. So eventually they were convinced it would work, and it did.
That said, I think there was a bit of a transitional period from what it says in your book, where so many greyhounds were used to what we call the real thing, that for a time, some of them even wore blinkers.
Yes, yes, there's a marvelous photograph in the book of a dog wearing blinkers. They were desperately hoping that this might, change their attitude. But of course, I mean, for instance, in this country, when greyhound racing started, one of the key figures in the beginning of greyhound racing was a man called Major Leslie Lyne Dixon. And Major Dixon's job was to find enough dogs so that they could actually get the track at Bellevue in Manchester started. They'd have enough dogs to run a card. So, of course, he went round all the coursing kennels, which he knew very well because he used to judge at coursing meetings. He was a popular judge at the time. And, of course, he bought up every dog he could get his hands on so that they could race at Bellevue. But of course, unfortunately, some of them weren't quite so keen on the artificial hare as they should have been. So they tried all sorts of things. And dare I say this, and of course, O.P. Smith himself had come up with another idea. This was a marketing idea more than anything else. He thought, if I can get these dogs to jump over hurdles, that will act as a great attraction as far as the crowd are concerned. And he was absolutely right. But what everyone very quickly learned in greyhound racing too was that if you had a dog which probably wasn't quite as keen on chasing the artificial hare as he should be, if there were 4 sets of hurdles in a race, after he jumped one, while he was just thinking about that he might have a go at the dog next to him, of course the next hurdle's coming, so pop, over he goes again, over he goes that one. So hurdle racing had a double importance in early greyhound racing. One, it kept the crowds happy, and also it kept the dogs happy as well.
Which probably could still be said to be true for today as well.
Yes.
I think greyhound racing, sort of to the wider public, can sometimes be associated with sort of gangsters and a bit of an undercover world. And there's a really gruesome book in your photo in your book as well of Edward O'Hare dead in his car. Tell us about that one.
Yes, well, we actually put a spoiler alert when we send out when people want a book and we send them an invoice. We actually warn them about this picture. So, of course, it's always the first picture they turn to. And poor Eddie O'Hare. Eddie was a sort of shyster lawyer from St. Louis. And he got involved in, a friend of his got involved in greyhound racing very early on, about 1926. And by the end of the 1930s, he was one of the biggest men in greyhound racing. He owned tracks in Florida and St. Louis and in Chicago and up in New England as well. He was a very big man in greyhound racing, but he made an awful bad mistake. And that was that the man who actually owned the track in Chicago was called Alphonse Capone, a well-known gangster of the period. And Al Capone ran the Hawthorne track, and Eddie looked after it for him. Eddie made the mistake of going to the FBI and whispering to the FBI about Al Capone's tax affairs. And it was Eddie O'Hare who got Al Capone put away in Alcatraz for tax evasion, even when they couldn't get rid of him in any other way. And when Al was eventually going to be let out of Alcatraz in 1939, 1 week before they let him out of jail, he just had one score to settle, and that was Eddie O'Hare. So he had him assassinated in his car in Chicago. They made an awful mess of him.
I'm sure there's a film in this book. I'm really sure there is. Another photo I wanted to touch on was the White City photo with the crowds, which you mentioned in part 1 of this interview. What was it like going greyhound racing when the crowds were like that? Because, I obviously never saw greyhound racing in that sort of glory. Was it like being at a football match? Would that be comparable?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes. It was absolutely marvelous. And you see, when I was going to the White City in the early 1970s, I was living in London at the time, it's in itself, pale comparison with, say, 1930. They would get 100,000 people to the Derby final in those days. And even when I used to go to the Greyhound, when Patricia's Hope and Yellow Printer and dogs like that were running, then the whole place would feel absolutely packed out, and all the great and grand would go. I can remember at the Derby final one year, they had because it was very hot. It was in the summer as usual, and outside the restaurant they set out all these tables so that people could enjoy the fresh air and have their meal and so on, the rest of it. But what they hadn't reckoned with, of course, was that just a couple of yards beyond their tables, there were all the rest of us peering at them. So I can remember seeing Bernard Levin, the famous journalist. He was a great man for the White City, watching the Derby final from his table al fresco at the White City, and all the rest of it peering at him from 1 yard away with our pints of bitter and our hot dogs and everything.
Fantastic.
Great nights.
Yeah,
great nights.
I don't want to give too much away from the book, otherwise we won't give people a reason to buy it. But there's also some brilliant stuff about Mick the Miller, and fantastic photos of him on a train and in retirement, and following that dog through his career. So the book is Please Mister. I highly recommend it. If you can see it all there. Where do people get this from, Charles?
Well, they get it through my Facebook page, which is called The Greyhound and the Hare. And there's a click button at the top, and all you do is need to click that, and I will happily send you we send you an invoice, and then you pay by PayPal, and job's done, we send you the book. Or you can get it on eBay as well.
Okay, and it's £35 delivered in the UK, and it's well worth it. It's a great coffee table book, great present for somebody that loves their greyhound racing. Nobody would fail to enjoy it. Charles Blanning, thank you so much for joining me, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I think these books will sell out pretty quick, like your last one did, to be honest.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.